All right. Well, hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Not sure where you're coming from here, joining us from probably around the world, but we're very happy that you're joining us here for this webinar on measuring what matters, well-being in the workplace. My name is Stephanie Wagner. I'm the Director of Learning and Development for Healthy Minds Innovations, and I'm also the host for this webinar today. And I just want to say how grateful we are, the team at Healthy Minds Innovations, that you're spending the next hour with us to explore this really important topic. So we'd like to start by just finding out a little bit about you. We're going to launch a poll here, and I'm just curious to hear how familiar you are with Healthy Minds Innovations and our work. So if you will please take a moment to share. Very familiar, somewhat unfamiliar, very unfamiliar. And we'll give it just a moment here. Okay, so it looks like we've got a range of results here. For those of you that are watching the recording, we've got about 24% very familiar, 46% somewhat familiar, 17% somewhat unfamiliar, and 14% very unfamiliar. So thank you so much for that. So for those of you that are maybe not so familiar with who we are at Healthy Minds Innovations, allow me to introduce you to a little bit about who we are and what we're about. So we're a nonprofit that is on a mission to take the latest science and to turn it into practical tools, products, and services, really everything that individuals and organizations need to both cultivate as well as measure well-being. We have a strategic partnership with a research institution at the University of Wisconsin-Madison called the Center for Healthy Minds. And both of these organizations, both Healthy Minds Innovations, as well as the Center for Healthy Minds, were founded by acclaimed neuroscientist, Dr. Richard Davidson. And you can see a lot about who we are at the bottom of this slide here. But let me tell you a little bit about some of the ways that we bring the science to life in the world. So we have a award-winning app called the Healthy Minds program that some of you might be familiar with. This is downloadable at your app store. This has been rated as the best app by New York Times, Wirecutter, Vogue, Healthline, amongst others. We have a wonderful curriculum that's called the Kindness Curriculum, which is designed for early childhood educators to implement in their classrooms. This curriculum was really instrumental in helping PBS win 2 Emmys. And then we also have online courses. We have a text-based program for college students to support their well-being. And we also have quizzes to support well-being, like our emotional styles quiz that's out right now. Lastly, the thing that I want to mention before I introduce you to our panelists here is we have our signature enterprise work called Wellbeing Science Services. And through this, we partner with businesses of all sizes around the world, offering scientific support, expertise, and measurement tools, really all in support of creating a kinder, wiser, more compassionate world. So we bring a lot into the world, and we are so grateful that you are here joining us today. So let's talk about why we're here today. We are here to hear from the science team at Healthy Minds Innovations about the science of well-being and the importance of measuring what matters. During the next hour, we're going to hear a little bit from each of our scientists at Healthy Minds Innovations on this topic, helping hopefully to provide you some valuable insights. And I know that this is a topic that's at the top of mind for many of us right now. And then after hearing from each of the scientists, we're going to save some time for your questions. So let me tell you a little bit about how we're going to run the Q&A at the end of our time together today. So when you look at your Zoom toolbar, you're going to see there's an icon that says Q&A. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this feature. So we're going to take the questions using the Q&A icon. Please don't put them in the chat. Put them in the Q&A. It allows us to track that more easily. The other thing that we're going to do is we're going to encourage you to vote for the questions that you want to hear asked first. So you'll see that when someone puts a question in the Q&A, there will be a little thumbs up icon, and you can click that if that's a question that you want to hear answered. And we will answer the questions that have the most upvotes first, just to prioritize what seems of the most interest for the audience, for all of you here. So before I move on to introducing you to the science team, I'd love to hear from you. What's one word you associate with a healthy workplace? And if you will please put your answer in the chat here, I'll give you a moment to do that. And I'll just see if I can pull out some things here. Lots of relational qualities like supportive, collaboration, psychological safety, connection, respect, trust. I also see an emphasis here on community, belonging, listening, empathy, resilience, work-life balance, cooperation. Great. Please feel free to keep those going. We'll kind of go back to that here in a little bit. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts here on that topic. So I want to turn it over to the science team, but let me first introduce you to our beautiful team of scientists here. So I'll just introduce you to each scientist and share with you a little bit about each of their area of expertise. So first, we have Dr. Raquel Tatar, who has a PhD in psychophysiology. She is an expert in the interdisciplinary field of well-being science, focusing on measuring and enhancing human flourishing through evidence-based interventions within academic and business settings. Then we have Dr. Tammi Kral, who has a PhD in psychology with expertise in the neuroscience of meditation and in evidence-based well-being training and its measurement using web apps and video games. We have Dr. Sasha Sommerfeldt, who has a PhD in psychology specializing in clinical research. Her expertise is grounded in emotion neuroscience with a special focus on the connections between the mind, brain, and body. She also develops innovative ways to measure the mechanisms that support well-being and brings that science into business settings to inform data-driven decisions for brands and leaders alike. And then we have Dr. Joanna, who has a PhD in health psychology, and she's an expert in applying psychological science across healthcare, education, corporate sectors, and technology, including founding an AI company. One of the things that I think makes this team of scientists incredibly unique is that we have an all-female science team. And so I would just like to celebrate and recognize women in science as I welcome on our first speaker today, Dr. Raquel Tatar. So Raquel, I know that well-being means a lot of different things to different people. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what is exactly well-being and what do we mean by well-being science?
Thanks, Stephanie. So the difficulty with talking about well-being science and even just well-being is that we've really been talking about this concept as a global society for hundreds of years. And we all know intrinsically and individually that well-being is important, but what is it exactly? What we know from our previous work is that well-being isn't just the absence of illness or the absence of ill-being, and it also isn't just happiness. It is entirely possible and likely that someone might be high in well-being, but appropriately at any given moment not be high in happiness. So those two things are related, but they're not identical. Well-being is really a holistic concept that encompasses your physical and your mental and social characteristics of your existence, as well as having the ability to have a meaningful and productive life. So ultimately, well-being scientists are studying how we can help people to actually lead meaningful, connected, healthy, fulfilling, and purpose-driven lives. So when we talk about well-being science, especially within organizations, we actually start by listening to you. You know your group better, and you know what well-being aspects matter the most for your group of people. So we want to know, like we just asked, what are the facets of well-being that are the most relevant for your organization? It might be work-life balance, like we heard, or connection, flexibility, psychological safety. We listen to you to define what well-being means for you. And then once we know what that looks like for your organization, we then work to determine how to actually improve it. And that's the benefit of well-being scientists, is that our research really shows that well-being is actually a skill that can be strengthened and learned through active practice. And as well-being scientists at HMI, we are driven by this larger curiosity about how to help people be their most well selves, and also this moral imperative to improve their lives through the cultivation of these well-being skills. And luckily, also as business leaders, investing in your workforce's well-being is this rare area where the moral imperative and the strategic advantage really meet, because investing in well-being is good for your people and good for your business. A lot of recent research has shown that decreases in well-being for both managers and employees account for a cost of over $400 billion globally, just in 2024. And furthermore, some research has also shown that for every $1 that you invest in organizational well-being, you can estimate a return of almost $3 in terms of increased revenue and almost $6 of return in healthcare savings, largely to preventing a loss of productivity from sick days and overall poor health. And despite these really strong indicators of the cost of not investing in well-being and of allowing ill-being to continue to proliferate in your organizations, many organizations will have a well-being solution as part of their healthcare plans or additional support they're providing their employees, but fewer than 20% of them are really making it a strategic priority to improve well-being within their organization. So they might even be spending money on a type of well-being solution without thinking through the impact that doing it poorly or doing it well can actually have on their organizations. So the opportunity on the table here really is to not only do right by your employees as a leader of people, and not only to actually make the correct business decision to improve and increase your revenue outcomes, but also to be a trailblazing leader, because nobody's really investing in this area despite the fact that they really should. So now that we know that investing in well-being for your workforce is the correct people and business decision, how do you actually go about this? How do you achieve well-being? How do you improve well-being? And again, our research really shows that this is a skill that people can learn, that they can strengthen through a little bit of practice every day. It's just like any other muscle group that you would train. And well-being might be the goal for your workforce, but it's also part of the journey. By increasing well-being along the way, you're ultimately reaching this larger goal of increasing well-being for your organization. And our past work has shown that this kind of training can be really impactful for individuals as well as the organizations themselves, and you'll get to see some of those data later on. But the task at hand first is really finding the right well-being training. There are a lot of different options out in the market. How do you actually know what the best investment for this is? How do you tell the difference? Because not every well-being training is actually created equal. So you want to look at what is informing the content and the training that they're deploying. Is it actually informed by the best and latest scientific work? This is a field that is changing and learning a lot, and it's a lot of work to keep up with the latest scientific trends to promote the best content for your employees. And also look at the evidence that has been collected about that well-being training. It's one thing to create a particular program. It's another thing to put it through the stress test and rigor of actively testing it over time with the best of scientific methods. And you also want to look at the metrics and outcomes that are being considered. We'll learn later that what you measure shows what you value, and you ultimately can't really change what you don't measure. So looking at the outcomes and the data that are being produced through these trainings will show you what the creators of the training program actually value and whether they're willing to prove the results of their training programs. And now that you know that you absolutely should be investing in well-being training in your organization, and you have some tips as to how to best find the best well-being training for you, we actually come to the final and most important question that you need to be asking yourselves, which is it working? Was it actually worth the investment of time and money that you put into this? So to answer this question, I'm going to turn it over to my wonderful colleagues who will walk you through the whys, the hows, and the whats, and the so whats of well-being measurement, starting with Dr. Kral. Tammi, can you tell us more as to why measuring well-being is actually so important?
Thanks, Raquel. So measuring well-being, as you have wonderfully put it in so many ways, is critical. Measuring well-being is critical to informing how you're going to invest in well-being for your organization, and also how you're going to demonstrate the returns on that investment. And when I'm talking about returns, of course, there are the financial returns, but there are also the returns in terms of the people that make up your organization, and the many people that your organization might impact. And so we know that well-being is interactive, in part because people are social creatures. So we know this from the science, and we also know this from personal experience. So I think we can all appreciate the feeling of having maybe a period of time where our well-being is lower than average. We might feel stressed out or depleted, and we've probably experienced the impact of that on, for example, perhaps having less patience in a frustrating situation, perhaps being less self-aware with difficult conversations, and maybe you've witnessed the impact of those reductions in your own well-being on the people with whom you're interacting. So I think that's a social experience that many of us can resonate with. And again, the science also provides evidence to back up this point. In addition to the feeling of reduced well-being and how that can impact those around us, the contrast is also true. So when we increase well-being for people in our organizations, and by knowing how to do that, we can then create ripple effects throughout our staff at different levels, and over time, hopefully create a broader change that can influence our well-being culture to reach our customers, also our partners and collaborators. A recent poll from Gallup provides further evidence for this interactive aspect of well-being. They found that in 2024, manager engagement was not only the primary driver of productivity loss, but also staff engagement. So when the managers were more engaged, the staff were more engaged, and the contrary was also true. We know from the science that when employees have higher well-being, that they're more engaged at work, and more engaged employees create a better customer experience. So in this way, measuring well-being helps us connect the dots between the well-being of people within our organization, our customers, and ultimately our organizational performance. Science can also help us navigate the many pathways to and from well-being. So I know this is a very complex diagram, and that's really the main point. Well-being is complex. There are many different pathways to well-being, from individual skills that you can train to the downstream outcomes that higher well-being can have on our teams, our organizations, and ultimately things like turnover costs and even revenue. And so scientific measurement can help us navigate this and learn how we can have the best impact. One way we can do that is look at where we see organizational strengths. So for example, in recent work with a nonprofit, we found that the employees were satisfied or very satisfied with their jobs, and over 70% reported that they were often or always feeling a sense of community at work. So this knowing about what your strengths are can help both boost your organizational reputation as a good place to work, as well as one that cares about well-being and invests in it. Sharing this kind of information internally can help boost your team morale. This can be especially helpful when you're identifying opportunities for growth. So knowing where your strengths are, having people built up about what the resources are that they can rely on to then address maybe some more difficult areas. So for example, work with the same nonprofit found that about 40% of employees reported that they would benefit from more support from their managers. So even while they were satisfied or very satisfied with their job and they felt a really strong sense of community, there's still this opportunity for growth and support that they could still use. So I've talked about how measuring well-being can help you identify your strengths, opportunities for growth. But what about changing well-being? We're back to this complexity question. So as I mentioned, there's not one path from the skills to well-being to the outcomes. And so by taking a scientific approach, we can help identify which of these factors might be most important for your organization in a given place and time that you're in, how to improve well-being within your organization and also for your customers, and then how to manifest those downstream impacts. This is one reason, this complexity, why we start every research engagement with a lot of in-depth conversations with as many people as we can talk to who are involved with an organization. And based on our scientific expertise and the information we gain from those conversations, we can help identify a scientific approach that will give you more precision for taking action that will have the highest impact possible. And so, for example, with a recent corporate engagement, we found that overall, the services that the company was offering to its customers were highly effective. So people were seeing significant reductions in their stress, significant improvements in their well-being, as well as significant changes in outcomes that they had reported as desirable that they were seeking through using these companies' services. In addition to these overall positive benefits that we were able to demonstrate, we also found that customers who felt a stronger sense of community during the experience of these services had even larger improvements than the customers who didn't feel that sense of community. So while overall everyone is seeing some benefit, here's an opportunity for increased benefit by increasing that sense of community that the customers felt. In that same research, we identified that about 41% of the customers felt a strong sense of community with the company. So that's evidence for a really good start. Clearly also an area where growth is, an opportunity for growth is there. And so again, not only do we demonstrate the benefit, but then also we identified aspects of the employee interactions and the service environment that can help boost that impact. And then finally, once you've identified the area where you want to have impact, and then a training that might have an impact, the measurement can help you then demonstrate whether or not it's effective. And so in another example with our collaborators at the Center for Healthy Minds, they did a study with teachers where the teachers engaged in a 4-week well-being training program. And the teachers who engaged in that training were 6 times more likely to still be teaching 3 years later compared to their counterparts who didn't have the well-being training. And so this resulted in a benefit for the teachers themselves, as well as a 243% return on investment for the school district through reduction in turnover costs. And those reduced turnover costs are not only a financial benefit to the district, which oftentimes school districts, financial resources are very finite, especially for districts to choose which things to invest in. So this is a really important outcome for them financially, but also for the people, the teachers, the students, and the staff, because we know from the science that higher teacher retention is associated with a better classroom environment and better outcomes. So we can see that measuring well-being could tell us when interventions are effective, and just as importantly, they can tell us when we maybe need a change of course. And so Forbes recently reported that replacement costs for employees can cost up to 150% of employee salary. And more than just the lost investment, the lost financial investment, the knowing when to change course is also really important. Because in continuing to invest in an ineffective intervention is also a lost opportunity. And it's a lost opportunity for the people who might really need an effective intervention when they are sorely in need of a boost to their well-being. And so it's really important to measure to know when they're ineffective and when you need to change course. So for all of these reasons, I think it's really critical to assess well-being. And next, my colleague, Dr. Sommerfeldt, will tell you what it means to use a scientifically rigorous approach to measure well-being.
Thank you, Tammi. So, talking about how to measure well-being, it turns out that humans are complicated, which means so is measuring them. But we do it all the time, we have the hang of it. And it's important to consider the broader context of human lives in which well-being and its measurement take place. So people don't stay the same. They vary even within a day as they're going through different experiences, perhaps in the morning, getting the kids ready and out the door, and then transitioning into the workday, moving through different meetings throughout the day, interacting with different colleagues throughout the day, perhaps hitting that afternoon slump when things get a little sleepy for many of us. And these different contexts that a person moves through will impact the measurement, so it's important to take these into account. And then, of course, there's also beautiful variation across people as well. So there's differences in culture, in life history, in personality. All of these will also impact what supports or hinders employees' and customers' well-being. Like Tammi brought up earlier, customers who felt a stronger sense of belonging or community with the company tended to have better well-being outcomes. And this difference between people led to differences in how their well-being was impacted. So well-being measurement needs to be designed with understanding and consideration to these many different human contexts. So that's why, like we talked about, we start by conducting interviews with people whose well-being we want to measure, make sure that we're thoroughly understanding them and their context so that we can take it into account when we're designing and selecting measures of well-being. It's not just the humans that are beautifully complex and multidimensional. Well-being itself is also very complex. And our science team is made up of well-being experts, and so we're very well versed in this complexity. We love it, even though it is kind of a web to navigate sometimes. So here's a very long list of well-being related factors. Believe it or not, these are just some of the many different factors that might influence well-being in the workplace. There's even more. But here too, we consider the specifics of your organization in determining what aspects of well-being are relevant to measure for your specific organization. And this slide that Tammi showed earlier also highlights the complexity of well-being, again, showing many different facets. There's precursors and consequences of well-being, and they're very interwoven. And the lines between different factors here often have arrows at both ends, meaning that they can impact each other in either direction. And across well-being factors, there's many complicated interconnections and interactions that we consider. Measuring any aspect of well-being, of the many on the previous slides, could also be done through multiple different modalities. So I'll briefly describe just a few of these today. The first one being self-report. So we're all likely familiar with self-report. We've all taken a quiz, answered questions about ourselves. But the types of self-reports that we use in our well-being science aren't just a Google form asking about preferences for a holiday party. They've been put to the test with hundreds, if not thousands of people, and very specialized statistics to make sure that they're reliable and valid. And so why should you care about reliability and validity in your well-being measurement? Well, imagine that you had a clock that only told you the right time half of the day. That would be a very unreliable clock. And half the time when you look at it, it's not giving you an accurate read on the time. So imagine if that was your well-being measurement. You definitely don't want that in a well-being measure. You want to be able to be confident that every time you use it, it's giving you an accurate read. We want our well-being measurements to be reliable. And then for validity, you could imagine that you had a clock that never told you the right time, but it still looked like a clock. It presented itself like a clock, except it didn't perform the basic functions of a clock, which was telling you the time it was. So that's not a valid clock. And similarly, that would not be something you want for a well-being measure. You want to be confident that it's giving you a signal that's representing true well-being and not something else. So that's validity. And these things matter a lot. We have expertise to select the measures or develop new measures that have undergone the kind of specialized and rigorous scientific and statistical tests to make sure that they're both reliable and valid so that the measure of well-being can really be trusted. Similar to self-report is experience sampling. So this is, instead of sitting down and filling out a questionnaire at one point in time, experience sampling is often texting people very brief questions throughout the day as they're going about their daily lives. And so you're getting a feel for their responses in the context of their daily life. So one thing with classic self-report is that it might be prone to memory biases. And when you ask a person how they usually are or how they usually behave, they have to do some mental calculus, remember things accurately, and do some approximation to kind of generalize over a span of time. But with experience sampling, you get around that by giving a read in the moment in the context of their life, because you're asking them as they're actually in their life and seeing how they're doing. So you can think of experience sampling in a moment in the workday. Perhaps rather than asking people through text messages a bunch of questions, people could get brief questions through team messages or Slack integration, and then provide brief ratings of how they're doing right after a meeting or in the transition from work to home at the end of the day. And that can help us better identify where well-being might be supported or be obstructed, so we can better identify the right intervention for the right time and where in the day is actually impacting well-being. And then similarly, if you have a product or a service that you're interested in measuring, seeing where people are at after their first use, after repeated use, and identify where well-being is being impacted to again evaluate what part of the product or service at what time in the user experience could shift to best support well-being. So both self-reports and experience sampling might be liable to limited levels of self-awareness. So people have varying levels of their own awareness of their thoughts and their emotions. Some people are more self-aware than others. And people have to be aware of things in order to report on them accurately. So that is one limitation of self-report methods. But to get around this, we use behavioral tasks. So behavioral tasks are almost like little games that we have people play. And their performance is often recorded with millisecond precision. So these are very precise tasks. These games or tasks go through similar rigorous testing to the self-reports to make sure that they're both reliable and valid so that we can trust the data that we're getting back. So one example is a task that might look almost like a little gambling game, which would be kind of fun to do in the workplace, but it would be assessing risk aversion or impulsivity to identify how those factors might impact well-being in the workplace. So you can imagine how that might get us a different read and perhaps more accurate data compared to self-report, compared to asking someone how risk averse or impulsive they are, where they have to be aware in order to report on it. So we could use a behavioral task that doesn't require people to be self-aware. And then the last modality I'll briefly cover today is data that your organization might already be collecting, and that's passive data. So passive measures don't require any additional effort from the people being measured, although it still requires their consent, of course. Informed consent is very important to us. But for passive measures, you could think of something like an average decrease from someone's usual email response time. And that could be an indicator that they're feeling perhaps burnt out or they're not getting enough sleep, and a well-being intervention could be beneficial. And this could be recorded from email software without even registering the content of the messages to maintain more privacy, but just receive and send times. Passive measures could also look like automated metrics from Zoom meeting recordings, with algorithms identifying tone of voice of different speakers or diversity of who speaks up in the meeting and who might not be heard. So these are not the only measurement modalities available, but just to give you a flavor of some of the variety of measurements we consider when creating a custom well-being measurement solution for an organization. So humans are complicated. Well-being is also complicated, and well-being can't be measured in just one way. It requires careful and curated designs specific to the individuals, the organization, and the context. So we work with organizations to curate a set of methods that make sense for that specific organization's goals and context, and that meet the needs of the organization. After all, your insights are only as good as your data. Without good measurement, any actions informed could be in the wrong direction. So you need a really solid foundation of good measurement to inform actions for impact. And Dr. Joanna Hong is going to tell us more about how well-being insights can lead to that impact for the organization.
Thank you, Sasha. That was a perfect setup. So now I'm going to talk about how we actually turn well-being insights into real impact. And I want to start with a paradox that many of you may recognize. Nearly 85% of large US employers offer workplace well-being programs, and global corporate spending on wellness is expected to exceed $94 billion by 2026. And yet, despite this immense investment, employee burnout continues to climb and mental health needs are rising. And that disconnect between the rising investment and limited outcomes has a name. It's called well-being fatigue. This happens when initiatives are inconsistent, unfocused, or fail to resonate. Instead of supporting people, they risk becoming background noises. Employees begin to tune out, feel disillusioned, and miss the opportunity for meaningful growth. So what now? Well, it really starts by shifting from quantity to quality. It's not about offering more, it's about doing better. The right strategy is one that turns insight into action through clear metrics, meaningful goals, and integration into the DNA of how your organization operates every day. So during my time with you today, I want to explore 3 ways that organizations can turn insights into lasting impact. And the first is aligning what you measure with what really matters. If we want well-being programs to make a difference, we have to start by measuring things that actually matter and that science shows are most impactful to mental and emotional health at work. At HMI, we've identified core skills, 4 of them, that form the foundation of well-being. And the good news is that these skills are trainable. So the first skill is awareness, which is building the ability to focus and be present. Second is connection, strengthening empathy and healthy relationships. Fourth is insight, deepening self-awareness and emotional intelligence. And last, purpose, helping people align daily work with what truly matters to them. And when organizations focus on building these skills intentionally, these results are powerful. We saw these outcomes firsthand in our pilot studies that increased awareness, connection, insight, and purpose were linked to reduced burnout and improved engagement, as well as greater manager support and flourishing teams. And these aren't just ideas, they're outcomes that drive real change. Now, that was the first way organizations can turn insight into lasting impact. I want to now look at the second strategy, which is pairing insights with the right tools. So choosing the right tools is essential. Insight alone doesn't move the needle unless it's paired with evidence-based, easy to implement tools that align with your specific goals. So at HMI, we offer scalable, scientifically grounded tools that help people train the 4 core skills of well-being and beyond. But tools only work if they're consistently used. But well-being efforts are reinforced over time, built into the daily rhythm of work. They stop being an initiative and they start becoming part of your organization's culture. That consistency builds trust, and that trust fuels engagement. So our data shows that when well-being practices are sustained, people benefit. So for example, those who used HMI tools experienced 27% reduction in burnout, 50% increase in overall well-being after 12 months of program use, 6 times higher retention among pre-service teachers who trained in mindfulness and connection, and 23% reduction in cortisol, so even in their physiological health. This data demonstrates the power of consistent, science-backed well-being practices in driving real change. So now we've covered the first 2 ways organizations can really turn insight into lasting impact. And I want to now talk about the third and the final strategy, which is empowering employees with personal well-being insights. Now, the data is clear. When the right tools are used and grounded in science, the impact is meaningful. But we truly believe that organizations can do more. So one powerful way to strengthen well-being effort is by giving employees direct access to their own well-being insights. We've developed a system that provides personalized reports, giving employees a clear snapshot of where they're thriving and where they can grow. Seeing their own data helps employees understand themselves better and motivates them to take action. And this shift from anonymous metrics to personal insights boosts engagement and leads to ownership. So at the team level, it fosters conversations. And at the individual level, it builds self-awareness and inspires action. So this isn't just transparency, it's empowerment. And when data becomes personal, insight leads to lasting change. And that now brings me to my final message. Every data point is more than a metric. It's someone's stress, it's someone's resilience, and it's someone's story. And what you choose to measure shows what you truly value, because when you act on data with care, with science, and with purpose, you don't just improve well-being, you show people they matter. And that's how you build a workplace where people truly thrive. So thank you for your time that you are spending with us today. And now I want to turn it back over to Stephanie to lead us into our Q&A session.
Thank you so much to the science team. So at this point, we're going to move into the Q&A. So if you have questions that have come up for you during any of the presentations today, please feel free to put them in the Q&A function of your Zoom toolbar. And if you missed the beginning intro portion of this webinar today, we are asking for you to vote which questions you would like to hear responded to first. And there are quite a few questions actually about ROI. And so I'll start with the first one, which is, and I think that this came up actually during Dr. Kral's presentation. Are you measuring these outcomes with surveys? If so, what is your survey response rate? Wondering how honest people are in their surveys.
Thanks. That's a great question. So the survey response rate is somewhat variable. And we also employ a number of different methods to basically filter out responses where you can tell that someone is speeding through the survey, where they're not thoughtfully considering the questions. So that's a really important aspect of the science, is sort of the data cleaning aspect. With regards to the surveys themselves, I think that question may have also been sort of referring to the diagram I had with all the different boxes and arrows. And one thing I wanted to comment about that is that not each of those, so each of the arrows in that diagram represents an area where we have scientific evidence for the connection, and not from just like a single study, but from many studies or from meta-analyses. However, not all the data in that diagram, only a portion of the data come from our studies. And so that diagram is the result of a review of the scientific literature more broadly, as well as some of our own studies that we've done. And so I just want to clarify that point as well. Yeah. And it's definitely not exhaustive, right? I think someone also mentioned something like exercise. Physical exercise is huge and very well appreciated as something that can improve well-being. It's not something that we're focused on exclusively, but definitely worth noting that as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Kral. I'll move into the next question that I'll just allow whoever wants to respond. Can you share an example of a personalized work plan?
So this is an area where it would really depend on what are the facets that matter to a particular organization and what are the areas of well-being that are really the most meaningful. So some of the examples are like what Dr. Kral was presenting in her presentation, where there's a feeling of community that some of the participants and some of the employees were reporting in that organization. So that personalized work plan a lot of times is developed in collaboration with the leadership in an organization and as a way of helping to drive some of those conversations between leaders and their direct reports.
Great, thank you. The next question also came up during Dr. Kral's presentation. Can you explain how you measure the pieces of the chart on ROI to drive retention and revenue?
Thank you. Yeah, that was the one I think I was answering a little bit in the latter half of my previous answer, where a lot of those are measured through surveys. So surveys where individuals are reporting on their own well-being, as well as surveys where individuals are reporting on things like the support they're receiving or not receiving from managers, on their interactions with team members. So we get both self-report and what you might refer to as like other report. And then also, as I mentioned, a lot of the data in that diagram wasn't from our own surveys, but was drawn from meta-analyses of the scientific literature.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, the next question asks, can you share more about the interview questions you use when working with an organization?
So I think the interview questions are largely going to be, really customized to the needs of that organization. I see another question in the Q&A that relates to this about whether we scientifically measure other businesses' tools, and the answer is yes. And so it really depends on the context, right? So if we're engaging with an organization that wants to measure the well-being of their employees, if we're engaging with an organization that wants to assess the impact of their products or services on their customers, the interview questions might look very different. But ultimately, we're trying to get at aspects of the processes that they have in place, so processes that they have for their workplace, how their sort of customer experience journey goes, and really trying to understand at a deep level how things work in that organization.
Yes, and there's also an element of learning to speak this particular organization's language. A lot of times, obviously, we're using a lot of the scientific words for some of these well-being facets, things like psychological safety or even work-life balance. And in an interview question, we wouldn't just go and ask someone, tell me about your work-life balance. That's not a particularly like open-ended way of learning more about that organization. So as part of this interview, we'll ask some very broad questions like, tell me a little bit more about what your typical workday looks like. At what time do you go home? What do you do when you go home? What is that, process of transitioning from work to home look like? And then from that, we're able to do some thematic analyses and pull out the aspects that pertain to work-life balance. And that's how we know what we would measure later on in more quantitative ways. So as part of this process of really learning about what the organization needs most, we also learn how to match our style of asking questions to the language that leadership and employees are already used to using when they're communicating, so that the barrier of interacting with us is much lower, because we're not approaching this as scientists. We're not expecting people to come to us and know how to talk in our language. It's our job to meet you and to speak with your dictionary, essentially.
Great, thank you so much. The next question is asking about where to start. Is there a preferred way of starting with leadership or with the employee?
That's a great question. Do you want to take that?
I was just going to say briefly that I think at some levels, starting with leadership is always important, right? For buy-in, having the managers and the leaderships lead, especially when it comes to well-being, can really help to create buy-in. So I think that's really important. And I'll let Raquel build from.
Yeah, no, so to complement, I think that if you had to, ideally, you're going with both at the same time. If you had to pick one to start, I would actually recommend going with leadership first. Because especially what we know from our research is that improving your well-being skills takes continuous practice. It's not something you're going to do once or twice and then magically improve. It's like exercise, right? Running once doesn't magically make you lose weight or drop your cholesterol levels. You have to keep up with that over time. And well-being is a similar thing. You have to do a little bit over time. And that persistence is something that really requires leadership buy-in to not only continue encouraging that long after we might have left, but also in the hard days. We know that you're really engaging in behavior change. There's decades of research as to how behaviors and new habits are created and maintained. And what we know is that there's good days and bad days. And sometimes you're feeling really motivated and sometimes you're feeling really unmotivated, or it's just really hard and really easy. And it just a well-engaged and fully bought-in leadership team is going to help the rest of the organization weather those natural dips in variation in motivation and engagement, so that your organization will actually have the continued practice that will lead to bigger change in the long term.
I totally agree that it's really important to start with leadership buy-in, but at the same time, it's really important that throughout your employees are also aware of the progress and able to see their own well-being measure outcomes so that the process of measuring well-being doesn't just become a meaningless exercise that they have to do in an interval, that it does come with meaningful result, and it also can reflect their leadership board taking action with the data they provide.
Thank you so much. So the next question says, first of all, thank you so much for the presentation, very well prepared and for me greatly received. As a supervisor of 15 staff, is there a tool developed to help navigate the ever-changing day-to-day topography to keep a consistent and positive driven approach?
So this is our bread and butter. This is what we do all day, every day, is actually provide these tools that will help navigate these natural variations in day-to-day. So I would say a place to start is to reach out to us and come talk to us, because we very likely are able to have a solution that will fit your needs.
And I think a big part of well-being is also this flexibility to kind of react to whatever is coming up in the environment and being able to adjust our emotional responses. And so we can kind of keep some equanimity amongst all the uncertainty.
Great. The next question is directed towards Drs. Kral and Hong. This person is a healthcare economist specializing in outcomes validation, looking at employer-sponsored benefit programs like Healthy Minds. This person says, I've seen many examples where clinical effectiveness alone does not equate to cost effectiveness. That is, many clinically effective employer-sponsored mental health benefits will not lead to net medical cost savings. I'm not suggesting that ROI should be the only criteria to evaluate programs, but it's a useful way to separate meaningful value from marketing optimism in an environment where every vendor claims efficacy. So can you comment on how you approach calculating financial ROI?
Thank you. That is a great question. I have just a couple of thoughts off the top of my mind with regard to a couple aspects of that question. So one is that it really depends on how you measure it and what outcomes you're looking at. So when it comes to mental health benefits, it's possible that you don't see cost savings for a variety of different reasons. And one of them depends on like what you're comparing to. So maybe your costs aren't reducing, but if you have a proper comparison group, maybe you would see they would have otherwise gone up over time. So there could be sort of a mismeasurement aspect to it. The other thing is that medical costs as an outcome are extremely complex and have multiple inputs that many of which may be completely independent of the well-being initiatives you're doing. And so one of the things that we've been looking a lot at is outcomes like retention rates, things like repeat customers, outcomes that are but a little bit more precisely and directly linked to the types of well-being training that we're doing. It's not to say that medical costs aren't a good outcome to look at. It's just that there are a lot of different independent endpoints that are going into that. And so choosing the right outcome to a given context is really important.
Okay, great. So I think the next question is for Dr. Sommerfeldt. This person asks, which self-reports can we use?
That depends a lot on the context of the organization, I think. So there are just as many self-reports, actually more self-reports than those factors that I presented. If you remember that super long list, each one of those might have several self-reports that could be a good fit depending on the specific context of the organization. So it really requires like a customized approach in order to learn more about the organization, the people, and the situation that we're trying to impact, and then selecting measures out of the many that are out there and scientifically validated for that specific situation. So unfortunately, I can't provide specific self-reports without knowing more about the situation, but would love to talk more.
If you're looking for just sort of like as a very first start, like a catch-all, like overall well-being measure, there is a self-report tool that we've created and validated called the Healthy Minds Index. We published on that last year, and that'll at the very least be able to give you a sense as to like the overall well-being in your organization. And like Sasha was saying, we would be more than happy to help navigate what the actual measurement needs are so that we can provide the best tools for your needs. One of the things to consider too is that depending on how many facets of well-being you want to measure, if we were to just add one self-report scale for each thing, you might end up with a really long measure. And part of what we do also is to say, how can we take this large battery of questions and then shorten it in a way so you're still getting the signal that you want without asking people to answer 2 hours of questions every week or every day or something like that. So it's really, how do you get the most signal for the lowest amount of burden for your employees?
The next person is more of a comment, but maybe I'll invite like a response from one of you. So this person says, there is a body of scientific evidence that physical activity is positively associated with subjective well-being. And so they cite the number of studies and the number of individuals. This evidence appears to be much larger than many, if not most, of the factors in your model or those listed on the one slide presented. They say, consider including a little bit more about physical activity or inactivity in order to more accurately represent well-being science. Obviously, HMI and other scientists are greatly challenged when trying to understand complex constructs. So I'm just wondering if one of you would like to speak a little bit about that particular comment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we can have, and there likely are, whole dissertations on the complexity and multimodality of well-being and all of that it could possibly encompass. If we actually, believe it or not, some early iterations of the slide did try to be as exhaustive as possible. And then, of course, it's just a wall of words. So I absolutely agree that physical activity is an important component of well-being. And there are many other components that are also not listed on that slide, because otherwise that's what we would have done for the entire hour, is to list all of the possible ways. And that's part of why we strongly recommend a more bespoke approach to see like what are the areas that are actually important. We do have some engagements where physical activity is a really strategic priority for the organization. So we make sure that we capture that information, but that's not the same from every single organization that we work with. So we want to make sure like what are the areas of well-being that matter the most. And with our scientific expertise, we can say like, this is something that will carry a lot of signal in this particular context. Because even if something like physical activity or sleep or diet or family dynamic or socioeconomic, all of these variables can have a lot of signal and a lot of weight when it comes to measuring well-being, they're not always the best thing to measure at any given moment, because it might not lead to the most actionable insights for your organization.
Thank you so much. And so we are at 1 minute remaining in our time together. So I think that that's the final question that we could take. I just want to take a moment to thank our science team. Thank you so much for your thoughtful presentations and valuable insights. And thank you, audience, for joining us today for this hour of exploring this really important topic. And we really hope that you enjoyed the event. And in fact, if there's some primary takeaway that you got out of this session today, we would love to hear it in the chat. So our team is going to provide a recap of this event for you. So please be on the lookout for that. And in the meantime, if there are any questions that you have for us that we might be able to answer for you, please go ahead and reach out to our email address that's on the next slide here. And we look forward to seeing you at a future session. Thank you so much.